At 8:42 on a Tuesday morning in April 2001, a quiet street in Scottsdale, Arizona blew apart. A whole house, gone in a single breath of fire. When the smoke cleared and the firefighters dug down into the rubble, they found a mother and her 2 children. But the man of the house was not there. His wife's truck was gone. The family dog was gone. And Robert William Fisher, churchgoer, hospital technician, devoted family man, was about to become one of the most wanted fugitives in America. For 10 days, investigators sifted the ashes looking for a 4th body. They never found one. What they found instead was a trail, a bank camera that caught one last withdrawal, a missing SUV, and, 100 miles away, deep in the Arizona high country, a dog, sitting beside an empty car, still waiting for someone to come back. This is the story of the man who erased his family, and then erased himself. Scottsdale, Arizona, at the turn of the millennium, a sun-baked grid of red tile roofs and cul-de-sacs on the eastern edge of Phoenix, where the lawns are gravel, the garages are clean, and the churches fill up on Sunday. The kind of place families move to precisely because nothing is supposed to happen there. On North 74th Place lived the Fishers. Mary was 38, warm, organized, the engine of the household, the mom who drove the carpools and kept the family calendar. Brittany was 12. Bobby was 10. School, church, bicycles in the driveway. From the sidewalk, it looked like the photograph that comes with the picture frame. Robert Fisher was 40. He worked as a surgical technician at the Mayo Clinic in Scottsdale, respected, precise, dependable. On Sundays the family sat together at church. Colleagues called him quiet. Neighbors called him polite. It was only inside the walls of that house that anyone knew what he was actually like to live with. Robert William Fisher was born in Brooklyn, New York, in April 1961. And to understand what happened on North 74th Place, every investigator ends up going back, not to Arizona, but to the moment Robert's childhood broke in half. When he was a teenager, his parents' marriage collapsed. The divorce shattered him. Friends from those years say he rarely spoke about it, except to swear, over and over, that it would never happen to him. His family would stay together. Whatever it took. Hold that sentence. Whatever it took. He chased big versions of himself. He joined the Navy and dreamed of becoming a SEAL. He never made the teams. He wanted to be a firefighter, that didn't work out either. He landed, finally, in the controlled quiet of a hospital operating suite, competent, steady, and, in his own eyes, always one size smaller than the man he had planned to be. But there was one arena where Robert Fisher was exactly who he wanted to be, the wilderness. He hunted elk in the pine country below the Mogollon Rim. He fished mountain streams. He could shoot, track, camp, and disappear into the backwoods for days with nothing but what he carried. Remember that, too, because Arizona would. Inside the house, the perfect family ran on rules. Robert controlled the money. Robert set the schedules. Friends and relatives would later describe a husband who checked the mileage on the car, questioned every purchase, and ran his home the way some men run a barracks. Mary lived, in the words of people who loved her, on an allowance and a leash. And there was the temper. Neighbors on North 74th Place grew used to the sound of raised voices carrying through the desert evenings. Nothing anyone ever called the police about. Just the ordinary, deniable static of a marriage grinding against something hard. In 1998, the image cracked open. Robert had an encounter with a prostitute, a secret that surfaced in the most humiliating way possible, through an infection he could not explain away. For a man who policed his family's image like a fortress wall, it was catastrophic. There were tears, and counseling, and church. The marriage survived. The shame, by every account, did not fade. By the spring of 2001, Mary had begun to speak, quietly, to people she trusted, about leaving. And here the two halves of Robert Fisher's life slid toward each other, the boy who swore divorce would never happen to him, and the man whose wife was preparing to file for one. Monday, April the 9th, 2001, looked like every other day. School. Work. Homework. Dinner. If the Fishers' last ordinary day contained any warning at all, nobody outside that house ever saw it. At around 10 o'clock that night, neighbors later told detectives, they heard it again, raised voices from the Fisher house. An argument, louder than usual, then quiet. In most marriages, quiet is where the argument ends. In this one, investigators believe, quiet is where the plan began. At 10:43 p.m., a bank camera in Scottsdale recorded Robert Fisher withdrawing $280, the daily maximum, from the family account. The photograph is grainy, gray, unremarkable. It is also the last confirmed image of Robert Fisher ever taken. What happened next, no living witness can describe, and so we will say it the way the investigators concluded it, and no further. Sometime in the hours that followed, Mary Fisher was shot as she slept. Brittany and Bobby died in their beds. And then someone, methodically, patiently, pulled the gas line loose behind the furnace, and walked out of a house that had just become a slow-burning fuse. Tuesday morning arrived like every Arizona morning, bright, dry, ordinary. Sprinklers. Coffee. School backpacks by the door. For 10 hours, the house on North 74th Place had been quietly filling with natural gas, room by room, waiting for a spark small enough to ignore. At 8:42, it found one. The explosion lifted the roof and threw the walls into the street. Windows shattered along the block. Debris landed on neighboring lawns. Neighbors would describe a sound like a plane going down. That anyone on that street survived unhurt is close to miraculous. The Fisher house itself simply ceased to exist. Firefighters fought the blaze, then began the grim archaeology. In the ruins they found 3 bodies, Mary, Brittany, and Bobby. Robert was nowhere. And in the driveway of a family with 2 cars, one was missing, Mary's Toyota 4Runner. So was Blue, the family dog. The arithmetic was as simple as it was damning. For the first hours, there was still a version of this story in which Robert Fisher was a victim, pulled from the wreckage somewhere, wandering with a head injury, abducted, anything. The Mayo Clinic reported he had not shown up for work. Hospitals had no one matching his description. The version died quickly. Because the fire told its own story. Investigators traced the explosion to the furnace line, deliberately disconnected, not broken. The house had been turned into a timing device, hours of gas, then a spark. Whoever lit that fuse hadn't wanted to destroy evidence so much as to buy something more valuable. A head start. By the time the street exploded, the killer had been gone half the night. Within weeks, Robert William Fisher was formally charged, 3 counts of first-degree murder, and arson of an occupied structure. A federal warrant followed, unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. On paper, the case was solved. All the police had to do now was find him. That was 25 years ago. The answer to where, or at least the beginning of it, arrived 10 days later, 100 miles to the northeast. Past Payson, under the great forested wall of the Mogollon Rim, near a speck of a town called Young, some of the wildest, emptiest country in Arizona. This is where the road, quite literally, ends. This was not random country. This was Robert Fisher's country, the pines he hunted every season, the creeks he fished, the cave systems he had explored for years. If the suburbs were where he shrank, this was where he knew exactly who he was. And it was here, on April the 20th, that hikers stumbled onto something tucked into a grove of trees. Mary Fisher's Toyota 4Runner, deliberately hidden, branches pulled around it, 100 miles from the crime scene. And beside it, thin and hungry after 10 days alone, sat Blue, the family dog. She had been waiting the whole time. Whoever she was waiting for had walked away and never come back. Inside the truck, searchers found Robert Fisher's hat. No note. No blood. No direction. Around it, a wilderness of canyons, caves, and timber stretching to the horizon in every direction. The car was not an accident, investigators concluded. It was a statement, or a trick. The problem was that no one could say which. What followed was one of the largest manhunts in Arizona's history. Trackers on horseback. Dog teams. Helicopters with heat cameras sweeping the rim country at night. Cavers roped down into sinkholes and lava tubes. Volunteers walked the drainages grid by grid, for days, then weeks. The caves were the obsession, because Fisher knew them. He had hunted and camped this country for years. Locals said he knew holes in that rim no map had ever recorded. Searchers checked every entrance they could find. They found bats, and bones of animals, and cold ash from old campfires. They did not find Robert Fisher. And that is how it stayed. In the years that followed, hikers and hunters would occasionally find human remains out on the rim, a skull in a wash, bones under a ledge. Every single time, the forensics came back the same way. Someone. Not him. On June the 29th, 2002, the FBI made it official, adding Robert William Fisher to its 10 most wanted fugitives list, the same roster, in those years, as Osama bin Laden. The Bureau's assessment was blunt: a survivalist, an outdoorsman, armed skills, and a man who should be considered armed and extremely dangerous. The wanted description read like a scavenger hunt for a ghost: 6 feet tall, 190 pounds. A surgical scar on his lower back. A gold chain. A chewing tobacco habit. Expert hunter, expert fisherman. Reward, up to $100,000. Tips arrived from every state in America. Some tips were tantalizing. In 2004, a man so closely resembling Fisher was reported in Vancouver, Canada, that police released surveillance images. It wasn't him. Over the years he was seen in campgrounds, casinos, border towns, and church pews across North America. Every sighting was chased. Every one of them dissolved. Which leaves the question the FBI itself has never been able to answer. Theory 1, Robert Fisher is dead, that he drove to the country he loved, hid the car, said goodbye to the dog, and walked into a cave or a canyon that no searcher has ever reached. Men who knew the rim said it plainly: if he wanted his bones never found, they never will be. Theory 2, the forest was a stage. Park the car at the edge of the wilderness, and every searcher, every dog, every helicopter looks into the trees, while the man himself walks out to a highway and becomes a hitchhiker, a drifter, a quiet handyman in somebody else's town. He had the skills to live off the grid. He had a 10-hour head start and 2 decades of practice being unremarkable. The FBI hedged its bets and kept aging him. Gray hair. A beard. Glasses. Heavier. Balder. Somewhere between those altered photographs, if he is alive, is the face of a man in his 60s who has now spent a quarter of a century being no one. Inside law enforcement, the split runs straight down the middle. Some career investigators are certain he died within days, in a hole in the rim. Others point at the hidden car, the maxed-out withdrawal, the survival skills, and see a man who planned his exit like he planned the fire. No body. No grave. No confirmed sighting. 25 years of nothing at all. In November 2021, after 19 years, the FBI quietly removed Robert Fisher from the 10 most wanted list. Not because the case was closed, the charges stand, the warrant stands, the reward stands, but because the list works on fresh eyes, and Fisher's trail had gone stone cold. It was a bureaucratic sentence with a chilling translation: we no longer expect a stranger to spot him. On North 74th Place, the crater became a lot, and the lot became a new house. The street healed the way streets do. At the Mayo Clinic, the quiet technician became a story told to new hires. In Scottsdale, the Fisher case slowly calcified from an emergency into a legend. And up in Young, under the rim, they still talk about it. Every autumn, hunters walk that country past 1,000 unnamed caves, and some of them admit they still look twice at any gray-haired stranger camping alone. The forest took Robert Fisher's trail in April 2001, and whatever it knows, it has kept. Here is the terrible symmetry of this case. Robert Fisher, by every account, was ruled by one fear above all others, that his family would come apart the way his parents had, publicly, shamefully, in front of the church and the neighbors. Investigators believe that rather than live through that, he destroyed the family entirely, and burned the picture frame behind him. He didn't lose the perfect family. He made sure no one else could have it either. Robert William Fisher turned 65 this spring, if he ever saw 65. So I will leave you with the question that has divided the FBI itself for a quarter of a century. The hidden car, the waiting dog, the hat on the seat, the man who knew those caves like his own hallway. Which ending do you believe, the cave, or the highway? Is he Bones under the Mogollon Rim, or is he the quiet old man at the end of some other street, in some other town, behind some other fence? Tell me which one you believe in the comments, and why. And subscribe, because the next case is already waiting. Some fences are white. And some men burn everything behind them, and walk into the trees.